Well, this is Dr. Stan here at Radio Liberty, coming to you from the hills overlooking beautiful and picturesque Monterey Bay, and bringing you the news behind the news, the story behind the story, hoping to convince you that reality is usually scoffed at and that illusion is usually king. But in the battle for survival of Western civilization, it's going to be reality and not illusion or delusion that will determine what the future will bring. And I need to remind you the views expressed here are not necessarily those of the owners, management, staff, sponsors, or supporters of the station you're listening to. They happen to be my views, and, of course, for the next hour, they're going to be the views of Joel Skousen from World Affairs Brief. And Joel, of course, his weekly analysis of the things that are going on. And ladies and gentlemen, we are living in truly cataclysmic times. We are going to see dramatic changes in the structure of our society. I believe we're going to see it sometime in the future. I don't know when, but we're going to see dramatic changes in America. We're going to see increasing civil unrest here. But I'm going to let Joel tell you what his thoughts are. I mean, you know what my thoughts. You listen to them over and over again. But let's get Joel's analysis of what's going on in the world and what is going to happen here in America and throughout the world in the coming months and years. Joel, go right ahead.
Well, thank you, Stan. It's good to be with you, and I, like you, like to offer a dose of reality once a week to your listeners. Let's talk first about Romney's win in Michigan. He won both the Michigan and Arizona primaries to the bitter disappointment of establishment kingmakers who are counting on Rick Santorum to deal a fatal blow to Romney in his home state of Michigan. Arizona, with its high majority of conservatives and sizable minority of Mormons, was an easy victory for Romney. But Michigan was hard-fought, but in the end it was Romney's perceived ability to fix the dismal economy in Michigan that swung the most voters to Romney. And many Republicans didn't take kindly to Santorum's appeal to Democrats to intervene in the primary in his behalf. Santorum engaged in a direct appeal to Democrats to come and help him defeat Romney. CNN said Santorum launched automated phone calls Monday asking Michigan Democrats to vote for him in the open primary, quote, to send a loud message to Massachusetts Mitt Romney. In Michigan's primary, all voters can participate regardless of party affiliation, and liberal bloggers have also been asking Democrats and independents to vote for Santorum as a way of damaging Romney's chances of winning the nomination. So in my opinion, you can take at least 5 to 7% off of Santorum's totals to see the real results. Ron Paul bested Newt Gingrich for third place, garnering 12% of the vote to Gingrich's 8%. And Gingrich won't quit, however, as the establishment is planning on one last push for him in the southern primaries, which are particularly vulnerable to establishment propaganda about Gingrich and his supposed conservative record, which is a huge lie that most conservatives have picked up on. Well, Romney and Santorum and Paul will each pick up delegates in Michigan. Romney will get 39% of the delegates, Santorum 33%, Paul 20%, and Gingrich 8%. But Romney will take all of Arizona's 29 delegates. It's a winner-take-all primary. A Santorum victory in Michigan, no matter how slim, would have been trumpeted to the world as a death knell for Romney. As Romney continues to slowly increase his lead in delegate numbers, the establishment's best hope now of stopping him is to keep Santorum and Gingrich in the race, hoping to stop Romney from winning an outright majority before the convention begins. They hope to create a deadlocked broker convention where the powers that be can inject some compromise candidate into the mix like Jeb Bush.
Well, do you think that they're going to be able to do it? Do we have any idea what's going to happen? If Romney has, I think people have to understand, if Romney has a majority of the delegates going into the primary, he's going to, of course, get the nomination. At least the first delegates are usually bound by the first vote for the candidate they're pledged. Is that correct?
Well, that is in most states. There are some states where the delegates are not bound.
Okay, fine. We're going to be back in just a moment with Joel Skousen as we analyze what's going on and, of course, what this means as far as America is concerned and, of course, this new administration. Well, this is Dr. Stan here at Radio Liberty. Our guest this afternoon is Joel Skousen from World Affairs Brief, and Joel is simply talking about the fact that Mitt Romney, won in the city in Michigan, and but Santorum was not too far behind. And although certainly both Romney and Santorum were in the 30s, and Joel has the exact figures, perhaps he would give it them to us. But certainly Ron Paul got 20% of the.
That's right, which is a big victory for Ron Paul. It's the highest he's got in an open primary.
All right. What was the number for Romney? What was the number for?
39% to Santorum's 31%.
All right, fine. So basically, go right ahead with the story, Joe.
Well, increasingly, Ron Paul's delegates offer Romney the only hope of beating this deadlock convention strategy. But for the first time, Ron Paul finally came out and responded to reporters' questions about whether he had already cut a deal with Romney. Paul adamantly denies any collusion with Romney, acknowledging only that their relationship is a little bit different than the others because he's friendly, he said, with Romney's family. Paul said he and Romney hardly agree on anything. Romney, of course, knew George Romney, Mitt's father. And so that kind of explains why he hasn't been attacking Romney out of regard for the family. But Paul said he and Romney hardly agree on anything, and that's the real truth. Nevertheless, there is a real possibility that Mitt Romney will have to cut a deal with Ron Paul if he's going to keep Gingrich and Santorum from using their votes against him. In other words, he probably can get a majority of delegates if he's close, if he can cut a deal with Ron Paul, and that would be some real compromises on Mitt Romney's part. He would have to compromise on his neocon foreign policy. He'd probably have to give in to some major concessions about auditing the Fed, or even allowing Ron Paul to dictate who might be the Secretary of the Treasury. Those are some things that we can hope for. Of course, the establishment is still trying to manipulate this election. Super Tuesday is coming up next week. The AP said a relieved-sounding Mitt Romney hopes to parlay twin victories in Arizona and Michigan into Super Tuesday momentum as the GOP presidential race sweeps across 10 states at once next week. After falling short of a Michigan upset, the AP said rival Rick Santorum faces stiffer competition for the conservative vote as he moves into Newt Gingrich territory. Well, Newt Gingrich, of course, was a Southern or a Georgia congressman.
Hold that thought. We'll be right back here. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and suddenly our guest is Joel Skousen. Joel covered the Michigan primary, and of course, very soon, within a week or two, we're going to be moving into the big Super Tuesday, and,
right.
And certainly it's going to be, this is an area very conservative, where Newt Gingrich may do fairly well. So go right ahead with the story there, Joel.
Well, Newt Gingrich hopes to capitalize on his endorsement from Herman Cain. Southern evangelicals will have, he's hoping that they will have been immune to the growing knowledge about his history of insider corruption and compromise. Gingrich, the former U.S. House Speaker from Georgia, is counting on Tuesday's Southern primaries to revive his campaign. It will be interesting to see how big a factor the anti-Mormon, anti-Romney factor is in the Southern primaries, where evangelicals are a big factor. And now that the campaign is maturing, and both Gingrich and Santorum have been partially discredited as conservatives. In other words, in the early primaries, like South Carolina, where the establishment put a great deal of emphasis on Gingrich, I'm sure they stole some votes and manipulated the election in South Carolina, but they did, unfortunately, convince a lot of good Christian conservatives that Gingrich was their person. And, it lasted halfway through Florida, and then Gingrich sank right down as everybody, began to realize what a crummy person this really was. The same thing is kind of happening to Santorum. He really took a lot of heat going up from both into the Michigan primary from both Ron Paul and Mitt Romney, especially about his just unconscionable support for Senator Arlen Specter, who was one of the worst conspiratorial, evil, insider senators we've ever had in the Senate. And to see those pictures blasted all over the Internet of George W. Bush raising Santorum's hand, Inspector's hand in victory after they defeated the conservative Toomey was just unconscionable, as I say. But I'm hoping that the southern primaries, that the evangelical Christians won't be swayed, to vote for the twin evils of Santorum and Gingrich. My favorite, of course, is Ron Paul, and I just am amazed that this isn't one of the favorites of the evangelical Christians, because he is a very, very good Christian, very, very solid backer of against abortion, and has just been true to his principles in the Constitution for so long.
Well, I think, the thing is that he does not keep talking about Christianity like Santorum does. And the thing about certainly that we find there's an organized effort within the Christian community which is thoroughly infiltrated to actually cast Ron Paul as a bad guy. We see all these organizations which pretend to be conservative, and for years, they've attacked communism and they stood up for family values, and now we see them united in a vicious attack against Ron Paul, pointing out certainly that he's anti-Israel and he wants to withdraw financial support from Israel, and he doesn't want to defend Israel, and Israel will be destroyed. And if you like Israel, why, of course, you're not going to vote for Ron Paul. Whereas it's just the opposite. He's the only person there who's against a war over there. If there is a war, whether it's incited by the United States or by Israel, there will be a terrible retaliation against Israel. And if you support Israel, why you should be supporting Ron Paul. And yet most Christians have fallen for this, just as most Jews have, that Ron Paul is an enemy of Israel. He's the only one who's really saying, let's take away the $12 billion a year we're giving to Israel's enemies. And why are we supporting Israel's enemies? Nobody ever asked that question. We go right ahead.
Yes, last night on an interview, I was asked, why does Ron Paul hate Israel? I said he doesn't hate Israel. I've known him many years, and he has the highest regard for the people of Israel, but he dislikes very strongly the neocon globalist Israeli government. And the Israeli government is masquerading as a right-wing government, but it is globalist. Benjamin Netanyahu is a Kissinger protege. He's just lying to his people by claiming to be right-wing. Well, Texas Republican, of course, Ron Paul, is still going to be a factor throughout this. He's not going to quit anytime soon. He'll go right into the convention. He wants to build this movement as much as he can, even if he can't win or they deny him the nomination. He's going to do well probably in states like North Dakota, and Washington is coming up on Saturday. Then, of course, Super Tuesday is coming up next Tuesday, where 419 delegates are at stake, including big primaries in Ohio and Georgia. Now, by the time Super Tuesday was done for last year, when they had most of the primaries were winner-take-all, the nomination was pretty well sealed. I am very much in favor of this changing of the primaries not to have winner-take-all. I really don't like 51% taking all the votes. This is really better where you parse up the delegates among the various ones and fight it out in a convention where Ron Paul can have significant influence. We've never had influence in this winner-take-all system in the United States. Can't remember the last time I was represented by someone that I voted for in Congress. Well, Romney's slim victory in his native Michigan raised questions about whether he needs to shift strategy, said the Associated Press. I say there's not much you can do when the system is trying to make you look bad and you've got a problematic record to defend. He said, we didn't win by a lot, but we won by enough. The former Massachusetts governor told cheering supporters where his father was governor in the 1960s. Well, I think, frankly, Stan, that Romney's probably going to get the nomination. That means, and this is very sad for me to say this, that means that the establishment will probably pull out all the stops to defeat Romney and re-elect Obama, no matter how unpopular Obama is. The reason is, this just really surprises me, as much as they are prepared to control Mitt Romney by surrounding him with advisors, just like Barack Obama's. Of course, Barack Obama is a knowing puppet of the establishment. He knows who put him out. He knows who's covering for his secrets. He knows who's giving him immunity from being an illegal alien in the United States as President of the United States. But Romney would not know that. And he would have to be controlled very, very carefully because he's a very strong leader, and he would not take lightly to, being bossed around by his advisors. They're deathly afraid, apparently, of what a non-insider might see in the White House with all of the illegal operations and the questions he might ask and the powers to get answers if he suspects something's going on. This is what's interesting. Here's a person with a fairly compromised record who isn't somebody that I would vote for, and yet the establishment, and Mitt Romney's bending over backwards to try to please the establishment, and yet they don't want him so badly that they've just been mounting campaign after campaign against both he and Ron Paul, and we know why they don't want Ron Paul, not only for the reasons that he's not an insider, what he might see, but he is absolutely uncontrollable by neocon advisors. So there's no question that they're going to make sure that Ron Paul doesn't get in. But the bigger question is whether or not Mitt Romney would get in. And I think they'll actually give us another 4 years of Barack Obama rather than have Romney as president.
Well, it's an exciting time, and it's going to be fascinating to see what happens in the weeks that lie ahead. So go right ahead.
Well, what's really exciting is that it's just so open and blatant, the political manipulation that the media is engaging in. The false polling that I've covered in the World Affairs Brief, how this is just unheard of in political circles. I'm a political scientist, been in this field for 40 years, and I have never seen polling numbers go from single digits to 40% and then collapse back down to single digits with nothing to explain it, which means that it is, in fact, falsified polling. That can only happen if something dramatic happens and a person makes a shining statement that everybody just loves and rallies around. But when there's no change, and suddenly you have a 30-point rise and then a fall a month later, you know that they're manipulating the polls. And the reason they come down before the election is because they don't want to get the polls discredited, so they start slipping the person in the polls when they know that they're getting close to an election that's going to show what's going on. Now, Santorum polled as high as he did because, in fact, they, took 2 whole weeks to blast this Santorum surge type thing. And unfortunately, I think a lot of Christian conservatives in Michigan got caught up in it, and that's why he got as high a percentage as he did. But he's still, I don't believe, going to be president. I don't think Newt Gingrich is going to be president. I think Romney's going to get the nomination, but they're not going to let him get elected.
Well, I think we should be very, very thankful that since Ron Paul got 20% of the delegates. I think that's amazing. It means that the message of liberty is getting out. The message of the Constitution is getting out. And people are beginning to listen despite the fact that the other side controls the media and largely controls what most people think. So I'm really encouraged by the great battle that Ron Paul's putting up.
I am too. He doubled the movement in 2008. He's doubled it again in this election cycle. I mean, literally, no one, for all that we've fought, all of these years stand to build the movement, we can't hold a candle to how many millions of people he's brought into the movement of liberty. It's just phenomenal. His influence will remain for decades afterwards.
And, of course, the amazing thing is he wants to do away with the income tax. He wants to do away with the inheritance tax. He wants to do away with the Department of Energy and Education and Housing and Urban Development and so many of the things he wants to do away with, foreign aid. He wants to stop the globalist movement. He wants a strong defense for America. And as he points out, I love the point, he says, we spend so much time and money defending the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan, but we don't spend hardly any money defending our own borders. I love that remark. Go right ahead.
Well, let's switch topics, talk a little bit more about the Iran war preparations heating up. The big story this week is that the Pentagon has realized through some very interesting assessment that they are vulnerable to Iran's weapons. Iran has sophisticated weapons, and so this is maybe one of the reasons why the U.S. has been postponing this attack in order to get our military prepared for it.
And I really don't think that the military leaders want this war at all, but because when you're in the military, you say yes, sir, no, sir. Well, I think there are an awful lot of military people who realize this is as foolish as you and I do. We'll be back in a moment. Joel, go right ahead.
Well, the military has notified Congress of plans to pre-position new mine detection and mine clearing equipment and expand surveillance capabilities in and around the Straits of Hormuz. The military also wants to quickly modify weapon systems on ships so that they can defend themselves against Iranian fast attack boats as well as shore-launched cruise missiles. Stratfor, as always uncritical of pet government wars, had this to say: the change in weaponry put a spotlight on what officials have singled out as potential U.S. shortcomings in the event of a war with Iran. The head of Central Command, Major General James Mattis, asked for equipment upgrades after reviews by war planners last spring and fall that exposed major gaps in U.S. defense capabilities and military preparedness should Tehran close the Straits of Hormuz. Well, Iran is no pushover militarily and has a full array of missiles, air defense, and sea-skimming anti-ship missiles, all from Russian arms. The Central Command review, in particular, have fueled concerns about the U.S. military's ability to respond swiftly should Iran mine the strait, according to the Associated Press. Well, actually, what they should say is, should the U.S. and Israel preemptively strike Iran and have to deal with her retaliation? In other words, they're claiming if Iran mines the strait, this is what we're trying to prepare for. The U.S. is concerned that Israel, which believes that Tehran will soon be able to assemble a weapon and that time is running short to stop the bid, may choose to strike Iran by this autumn. That's a politically sensitive time for Barack Obama, who may need a new war to get reelected, though that has to be balanced against the disaster effects of big rise in gas prices that will stymie the economy. Defense officials worry it could provoke retaliation that could prompt U.S. military action to defend its troops and key allies and keep the Straits of Hormuz open. Yes, the U.S. surely is preparing to appear the victim while it's actively promoting war. In addition, U.S. special operations stationed in the United Arab Emirates would take part in any military action in the Strait should Iran attempt to close it. Notice how this article keeps talking about Iran is attempting to close the Straits, and all of our military preparations are only defensive in preparation for Iran closing the Straits. But that's not true at all. This is merely an excuse. They also admitted military forces have been working to train elite local forces, what I call surrogate commandos, in these Gulf nations, including UAE, Bahrain, and Kuwait, but added they would be used in the event of active operations. So more and more, I think the U.S. is trying to build a coalition of allies by buying them off. I'll talk about that relative to Iran and their banking system, how they bought off the Bank of Bahrain. A decisive moment may arrive when Barack Obama meets Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on the 5th of March. That's Monday. The meeting will be definitive, but not for what the press will make of it. If the U.S. president wants to prevent a disaster, he must give Netanyahu ironclad guarantees, said Haaretz of Israel, that the U.S. will stop Iran in any way necessary and at any price after the 2012 election. That's the Israeli view. If Obama doesn't do this, they say, he will oblige Netanyahu to act before the presidential election. Now, I'm betting on the latter, that that Israel will attack Iran before the elections, and it will accrue to the benefit of Barack Obama, especially if American troops are hit in retaliation by Iran and we appear to be the victims. There will be a great wave of
Hold that thought.
propaganda.
Hold that thought. We'll be right back. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and certainly Joel's just talking about what's going on over there with Iran. He notes that everything is done to make it look like we're on the defensive. Oh, Iran is going to close the Straits of Hormuz, and we've got to suddenly be protected against that. Ladies and gentlemen, Iran has said they'd close the Straits if they were attacked. So they're not planning on closing the Straits and cutting off the oil supplies, but everything is being done to make it look like it's all defensive. We are actively over there training troops in all of the various Arab nations over there, so we can have a coalition of Arab troops going in and making it look like this is sort of all these people support the war that's coming down the line. I suspect we'll have our contractors there, professional troops. The whole idea is to make things look defensive. there's going to be a lot of talk between the Israelis and the United States, because I really think that the Israeli government is certainly an extension, subject to the decisions made by the Brotherhood of Darkness, the people who run our government. But certainly Joel thinks there could well be an attack shortly before the election, which of course would make Obama look good if he's certainly, especially if some American troops get killed. This would rally the people behind Barack Obama and help Barack to get elected or reelected. Go right ahead.
Well, the story has huge implications relative to the economies of Europe and the United States. Already the economy and demand for gasoline is at record lows in the United States, and yet gas and oil prices are rising. As I've covered in the World Affairs Brief, it's because our refiners are shipping a good portion of our gasoline diesel fuel over to Europe, and that's why diesel prices are higher than they've ever been. They used to be lower than gas prices, but it's because in this worldwide market that they get better prices by shipping the diesel overseas to Europe, where prices are almost double that there. And they're going to go higher, too, because Iran does send a lot of oil into Europe, and Iran has cut off that oil, even oil to France. Now, the big problem relative to the Greek bailout is that Greece relied on Iran for more than half of its oil imports during last year, and all major oil majors pulled the plug on supplies, and banks refused to provide financing for fear that Athens would default on its debt. Major traders are in talks with Greece to supply crude oil and help the country cut reliance on Iranian oil in light of the European ban and the sanctions on Iran. In a sign that they are happier about Greece's creditworthiness now that they're trying to, in other words, they're willing to overlook Greece's creditworthiness and give them oil from other sources to keep Greece from turning back to Iran. Greece turned to Iran as a supplier of last resort last year, despite pressure from Washington and Brussels to end trade as part of a campaign against Iran. Traders told Reuters that Swiss-based Totsa, the trading arm of French oil major Total, and trading house Mercuria were in separate negotiations with Greek refiner Hellenic Petroleum to help it replace Iranian crude. The trouble is with that strategy, that would come at the expense of crude that is destined for France and the rest of Europe, who is already seeing record prices. So the bailout, not only financially, but the bailout of oil is not going to be very popular with Europeans. The U.S. stepped in at the last moment to crush the last banking outpost that was still allowing Iran to take payment for oil from Greece. The Wall Street Journal talked about this latest arm twisting of allies. Quote, the U.S. Treasury Department disrupted a Dubai-based banking operation that Washington believes had become Tehran's primary conduit for evading international sanctions for its oil sales. The effort was particularly sensitive because the targeted institution is the United Arab Emirates and is partially owned by the local government of Dubai, a close ally of the U.S. The chairman of the bank, called Noor Islamic Bank, is the son of Dubai's ruler. In mid-December, Noor agreed to close off what people believed was Iran's single largest channel for repatriating foreign currency oil receipts, facilitating as much as 60% of Iran's foreign oil sales by late last year. You can bet that they paid off royally this son of the Dubai ruler to get him to close his bank to Iran's accounts. The U.S. is desperate to force Iran to retaliate for these war provocations in a way that can finally justify this long-anticipated attack.
I still think the American people have to understand we are at war with Iran. These sanctions are a form of war. We are funding the terrorists over there. MEK and other terrorist groups have gotten hundreds of millions of dollars from our government for terrorist activities and trying to overthrow the government of Iran. That is an act of war. I mean, somebody's killing the Iranian scientists over there and Iranian diplomats throughout the world. We don't know who it is, but we can suspect that the CIA may very well be involved. And, ladies and gentlemen, we're at war, but nobody wants to tell the American people.
While the storm clouds gather all across the sea,
Okay. Well, let's talk about the question of Iran's missiles. Amid speculation that Iran's new missiles can reach America, Spencer Ackerman tackles this propaganda claim by saying, calm down, Iran's missiles can't and won't hit the East Coast. Israel is claiming that Iran is this close to developing a missile that can hit American soil. But missile and intelligence experts say Tehran has a long, long, technically complex road to travel before it can threaten Manhattan. From getting all the rocket thrusters to work properly to developing heat shields that can withstand the stress of rapid atmospheric reentry, Iran is probably many years away from getting an intercontinental ballistic missile. The American spy apparatus, which once hyped the Iranian missile threat, has quietly stopped saying that Iran can hit the East Coast. And the irony is that it's taken Iran so long precisely because its missile efforts really are sophisticated. The bottom line, says Paul Pilar, a veteran CIA analyst, is that the intelligence community does not believe Iranians are anywhere close to having an ICBM. That's true, but I find it ironic the West making this Iran rumor a cause bellicus, but isn't even concerned about India being on the verge of attaining real ICBM status. India has long had close military ties to Russia and is already a rogue military or a nuclear power, and will soon have the missiles to deliver those nukes to other areas of the world. The Economic Times of India reports that India has begun final preparations for the first test of its most ambitious strategic missile, the Agni-V 5,000-kilometer missile, which will prove to be a technical as well as a logistical challenge. India could have gone for a higher strike range, but believes the solid-fuel Agni-V is more than adequate to meet current threat perceptions and security concerns. The missile can, after all, even hit the northernmost parts of China, which is India's most immediate and long-term threat. India, of course, cannot match China in terms of its vast nuclear and missile arsenals, with missiles like the 11,200-kilometer range Dongfeng 31A, which is unnerving the U.S., of course, who never warns U.S. public that about China and Chinese threats without a host of reasons why we should not be concerned. But missiles like Agni-4 and Agni-5 from India will certainly add teeth to its credible minimal nuclear deterrence posture. So what about North Korean missiles? Well, the timing is ironic. Just as the U.S. and Israel are preparing and stepping up preparations to attack
Hold
Iran.
that thought, Joel. Hold that thought. We'll be right back here in a moment here. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and certainly we're hearing a lot, certainly propaganda, it is propaganda, about Iran on the verge of having intercontinental ballistic missiles which could hit the United States, and it just isn't true. They may have some good intermediate range missiles they got from Russia, but they do not have an intercontinental ballistic missile. But nobody mentions the fact that India, which, of course, is a rogue nuclear state and does have thermonuclear weapons, and they've also sitting on the verge of having intercontinental ballistic missiles, and nobody ever mentions that. And then there's certainly North Korea. Are we concerned because they have the bomb? Are they developing certainly long-range anti-ballistic missiles? Go right ahead, Joel.
Well, they certainly are. They not only have missiles that can reach Hawaii, at least, that we know of, and perhaps the West Coast. They also have done a nuclear test, so they are a nuclear power, but the U.S. is downplaying it. But just as the U.S. and Israel are stepping up preparations to attack Iran for a not yet existing nuclear threat, the U.S. just announces another aid agreement with North Korea in exchange for yet another agreement to put on hold their nuclear program, which has already exploded one nuclear test. The newest U.S. deal with North Korea to halt its nuclear program boils down to this: hundreds of thousands of tons of food for a promise. You've heard this one before. North Korea always reneges, but only after the food is received. I mean, how many times do you have to get taken on this thing? And it makes you realize our people aren't just stupid, Stan. This is treason. This is suicide. This is protecting Korea as the trigger for World War III.
It's the old adage of creating the best enemy money could buy. It's what we did during World War II with the Germans, but we can't let the American people know that. It's what we did with the North Vietnamese during the Vietnam War, but we can't let the American people know that. It's what we did with Cuba, Fidel Castro's Cuba. The best enemies money could buy. but we can't let the American people know, I agree with you, I share your concern, and our job is to try to get people to think and to learn history. Before we go on, Joel, I want you to tell our listeners how they can get your information, how they can get a copy of the World Affairs Brief, how they can subscribe to it, and how they can get your books, which I think are vitally important. Your books like Strategic Relocation and the other two. Go right ahead.
Thanks, Dan. My World Affairs Brief is my weekly newsletter. There is a small subscription fee for this yearly, or actually weekly service that comes in your email. People can get a free sample copy if they'd like to see what it's all about by emailing me at editor@worldaffairsbrief.com. As for my books, they're extremely timely relative to these growing threats internationally with Russia, China, and North Korea and the various missiles that are proliferating. My top work in terms of securing your home against any of these threats is called The Secure Home. 700 pages, big as a telephone book, covers everything about security of a home, including remodeling, hardening a home or a retreat, as well as total self-sufficiency, generator, solar, hot water heating systems, multi-fuel boilers. All of those things are covered in this book. My bestseller, however, is Strategic Relocation, the brand new third edition, all new color edition with maps of every state and province in North America, as well as a new section on international retreating, something that is just fascinating to read about the various differences that we can find between preparedness places around the world. And it also talks a lot about contingency planning for people who can't move, but who must stay within major metropolitan areas. My last book is How to Implement a High-Security Shelter in the Home. It's an architectural plan book on doing a safe room in a basement. And all three of these books can be had at Radio Liberty.
By calling 1-800-544-8927, 1-800-544-8927, and they're among our bestsellers. Go right ahead, Joel.
Well, let's switch gears and talk about the Stratfor leaks. I've long maintained that Stratfor was a private outlet for U.S. government intel, selected, of course, to lure in mainstream clients and push the establishment pro-government view of foreign and domestic issues. After Anonymous hacked into the site and stole years of emails, I fully suspect the truth of Stratfor's too-good-to-be-true access would finally come out. However, it appears that, like WikiLeaks' stolen government emails, they are being sorted through and only selectively released. Most are ho-hum or personal opinion, but this blockbuster leak let the cat out of the bag. Stratfor's email says, Osama bin Laden was in routine contact with several senior figures from Pakistan's military intelligence agency, the ISI, while in hiding in the country, according to a large cache of secret intelligence files, confirming my suspicions that bin Laden was a U.S. asset being run through the Pakistani ISI and financed with Saudi money. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange accused Stratfor of involvement in a wide range of legally or morally questionable research activities for private corporations. Reuters adds that according to one of the emails, the firm was shown the information papers collected from bin Laden's Abbottabad compound after the U.S. Special Forces attack last May that resulted in his death. Of course, that was only given to Stratfor because they're a private front for U.S. intelligence. In fact, this was disinformation because, in fact, Obama wasn't there. This was the killing of a lookalike. Obama had died many years earlier. What eWeek.com said about Stratfor leaks, some of the passages posted in this first batch of emails reveal some potentially questionable practices. But it's not clear whether they were taken out of context or an example of how the company's analysts normally operate. For example, in a December email chain, Friedman told an analyst, if this is a source you suspect may have value, you'd have to take control of him. It's a very damaging email. It's only said by those who are used to dark side government practices, because normally a private corporation wouldn't have any power to take control over someone. But if they are linked to government, they could. In another internal memo from August 2011, George Friedman, this is the CEO of Stratfor, discussed a venture between Goldman Sachs managing director Shia Moran and Stratford to establish a captive strategic investment fund called StratCap. StratCap would use Stratford's insider intelligence analysis to trade in a range of geopolitical instruments, particularly government bonds, currencies, and the like. Now, this is all highly illegal, but you notice the government isn't taking any notice. Another sign that Stratford is a shill for government and being protected by government.
I think you're absolutely right, but the people don't understand that so much of what goes on today is to create a reality, a false reality. Go right ahead.
Well, WikiLeaks called Stratford a private intelligence company and claimed the global intelligence files, as Stratford emails have been dubbed, showed how government, diplomatic, and media sources gave Stratford advanced knowledge of global politics and events in exchange for money. The informants were a mix of covert and overt informants and were paid by Swiss bank accounts and prepaid credit cards, WikiLeaks claimed. You can bet this stuff never got reported to the IRS. Perhaps it's only somewhat ironic that the announcement of the resignation of Stratford's CEO, George Freeman, would come in the form of a leaked email also. It was once again intercepted by Anonymous and announced a couple of days ago. Indeed, George Foreman has resigned over this scandal. George Friedman, I'm sorry. Well, privacy intrusions continue apace, Dan. According to the FBI counsel, Andrew Wiseman, speaking at a University of San Francisco conference called Big Brother in the 21st Century, on Friday said that the Supreme Court ruling that warrantless GPS tracking was unconstitutional forced the FBI to turn off about 3,000 GPS tracking devices that were in use. These devices were often stuck underneath cars to track the movements of car owners. In U.S. versus Jones, the Supreme Court ruled that using a device to track a car owner without a search warrant violated the law. They should have said it was unconstitutional and a violation of the Fifth Amendment. Or not the Fifth Amendment, but the First Amendment. I'm sure the FBI did collect many of their devices, but I'm not believing they took them all away. The dark side of every government agency knows they operate with impunity and above the law. Mr. Wiseman admitted the FBI is now working to develop, quote, new guidelines for the use of GPS devices so they can go back to Congress and make legal what has been ruled unconstitutional. This is the same tactic the government used when it was discovered that they were doing illegal wiretapping of phone and Internet. They admitted to a few violations out of millions and then got government shills in Congress to give them even broader legal authorities in the ever-useful name of fighting terror.
But, I think that whole idea of government wiretapping, and basically the people from NSA can go before government and say, we do not wiretap American citizens without a warrant. They do not say we don't have access to the wiretaps because under Project Echelon, why British intelligence comes in and certainly listens to all the conversations and reads the emails and faxes. The British intelligence does it here. NSA does it over in Great Britain, and that way they can go before Congress and honestly say, we do not wiretap American citizens. That's Project Echelon. Anybody can look it up on the Internet. It's ingenious how they can do this, and with a straight face they can say, we do not wiretap. No, the British do it. Go ahead.
But they do anyway. It's not just that the British do it. They've just got millions of gigabytes of computers just tracking every email and every telephone conversation, including this interview. We might as well say hello to them. Thursday's decision by the U.S. Circuit Court, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, said that an encrypted hard drive is akin to a combination to a safe and therefore is off limits because compelling the unlocking of either of them is equivalent to forcing testimony in violation of the Fifth Amendment. This ruling was quite correct, but this was only at the appellate level and may yet reach the Supreme Court, so it isn't necessarily the final word. The Obama administration, as Bush before him, has sought for every possible power to justify the total surveillance society that's been ongoing for the last 30 years. In an ironic twist, Colorado federal authorities said after the ruling they'd already decrypted the laptop seized in the court case, and that makes the moot judge's ruling about it, about they can't do it. In other words, they said they already did it. Of course, now they can't use the evidence because it would be ruled inadmissible unless, of course, the government has a controlled judge who will disregard the recent ruling, and that's possible too. But despite these few temporary setbacks to government spying, other agencies are moving ahead to set the stage for even more intrusive spying and tracking of each individual and residence in the U.S. The news that the Census Bureau was spending millions in a military contract to provide GPS coordinates for every U.S. resident certainly dovetails with the new FAA authorization permitting up to 3,000 future drones to patrol U.S. skies. Marlene Motley reports that tying all this together, it seems as though the government has implemented the United Nations plan to GPS mark all residences. It's a worldwide version of Big Brother, and this will make it possible to send in drones instead of personnel when the government chooses. In 2004, the United Nations Secretariat published a PDF entitled United Nations Expert Group Meeting to Review Critical Issues Relevant to the Planning of the 2010 Round of Population and Housing Census. How's that for a title? Subtitled Integration of GPS, Digital Imagery, and GIS with Census Mapping. This study is about GPS mapping through the census process, and that's exactly what the U.S. did in their census process this year, and they didn't tell anybody that they were using GPS until it was found out externally. In 2006, NPR carried the story, Census Bureau adopts GPS to find American homes, and it stated the following. 2.5 years from now, in early 2009, Census Bureau plans to send an army of 100,000 temporary workers down every street and dusty, dirty road in America. They will be armed with handheld GPS devices. Robert Macchia, head of the Census Bureau's Geography Division, says they'll capture the latitude and longitude of the front door of every house, apartment, and improvised shelter they find. We will actually knock on doors and look for hidden housing units, he said. We will find converted garages from the outside. It may not look like anybody lives there, but census workers will add each dwelling unit, legal or not, to the Census Bureau's master address file. Recent proposed budget cuts have put part of this plan in jeopardy, but if Congress restores the money, the census will be end up the geographic coordinates within an accuracy of 10 feet for 110 million residences.
But Joe, what people don't understand is this is going on not only in America, but all throughout the world. Over in India, why they're getting certainly biometric identifiers and issuing national identity cards to all 1.2 billion people. And they know exactly what they're doing, and they're collecting the biometric identifiers. I know came into the country here recently, and people that they come into the country, American citizens, were getting their iris scanned. They would have to put their palm up on the screen, then their thumb onto the screen. They're doing this, and they're going to be doing it very soon all throughout the world. People don't understand these people are deadly serious. Everybody is to be monitored and controlled from the cradle to the grave. Everyone in the world. And, of course, a lot of the money is coming from the American taxpayer. That's one reason why 43 cents out of every dollar our government spends has to be borrowed. But we are financing this whole move towards world government. Go ahead.
And then there's the issue of the Department of Homeland Security paying General Dynamics to scour the Internet for people critical of DHS policies, who are legion, of course. Former presidential candidate Pat Buchanan, who was just fired from Fox News, reports that they're paying a defense contract $11.4 million to monitor social media websites and other Internet communications to find criticisms of the TSA and DHS policies. A government watchdog organization, the Electronic Privacy Information Center, obtained hundreds of documents from DHS through the Freedom of Information Act and found details of the arrangement with General Dynamics. Well, on the Internet control front, Bloomberg Businessweek covered the news that Windows 8 by Microsoft will have a kill switch to intervene in your computer and delete dangerous software. With the rollout of Windows 8 operating system expected later this year, millions of desktop and laptop PCs will get kill switches for the first time. Microsoft hasn't yet spoken publicly about the reasons for including this capability, beyond a cryptic warning that it might be compelled to use it for legal or security reasons. Well, this is just getting more and more, it's going to be, I think you're going to have a lot of people switching to, other operating systems if this happens. It won't be used now, but certainly, if that kill switch exists, it certainly allows for any number of expansive applications later on, including deleting videos and emails critiquing the government.
Well, we go back and read George Orwell's 1984, and they had these television cameras who were watching everybody in their homes. Everywhere they were watched by a television camera. And if you have a laptop or a cell phone, well, there's a little camera in there that can watch you all the time. You can talk to your friends, and they can watch both of you. This is not accidental, ladies and gentlemen. They've even certainly got software in there so they can track exactly where you are. And when asked why it's there, they said, how did that software they get there? Joel, go right ahead. You've got 3 minutes to wrap up the program.
Well, let's finish with a story about the IRS sending intimidating letters to Tea Party organizations. There seemed to be a wave of reports coming in from Tea Party organizations saying they're getting IRS demand letters for information on political activities, which is strange since none are claiming to be tax exempt. Colleen Owens writes, the Internal Revenue Service began sending out letters to various local Tea Parties. There are several common threads to these letters. All are requesting more information from the independent Tea Parties in regard to their 501c4 applications. Now, remember, 501c3 is tax exempt, like churches and educational institutions. 501c4 are nonprofit, but donations are not deductible. So what are local Tea Parties to think with requests like, please identify your volunteers, or are there board members or officers who will run or have run for office? What possible reason would the IRS have to name your donors when said donations are not tax deductible? This is just a fishing expedition and an audit, basically, to harass these people and to threaten them with, perhaps, I think, as happened, several years ago when they started auditing conservatives who gave to political campaigns. And this was, highly illegal to use the audit process of the IRS and harassment process of the IRS for political purposes. It's, of course, no wonder that 6 senators sent a request to the IRS commissioner asking him to determine whether Tea Party organizations are engaged in substantial campaign activity, including opposition to any candidate. This letter was signed by Senators Schumer, Franken, Udall, Shahan, Whitehouse, Merkley, and Bennett, all Democrats. So we can go figure. That's the world of politics in our United States.
I agree with you. Why weren't there any Republicans signing that?
Well, I'm glad there weren't. There probably were a few that were liberal enough that they could have signed it. But no, this was a Democratic hit job against the Tea Party.
Well, I think we've got certainly real problems. Our guest today, of course, has been Joel Skousen from World Affairs Brief. Excellent material. Joel, I want to thank you very much for being with us, and we look forward to having you with us again next week at the same time.
Thanks. Bye now.
God bless. Bye-bye. Okay, fine. That was Joel Skousen from World Affairs Brief, and you need to get Joel's material. You need to read it. We don't cover the entire publication here. There's not enough time. It's about 12 or 14 pages. Lots of things important that you will get only on the brief. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and certainly we hope you enjoy our weekly conversations with Joel. He's a very, very astute observer. Now, we do carry his books on strategic relocation, the secure home, and the secure room. They're available by calling 1-800-544-8927. 1-800-544-8927. You need to read my book, Brotherhood of Darkness, to understand that our government has been taken over. It is not that our government is bad. It is a small group of wicked people who certainly worship a different God, who are responsible for our problems today. And there's only a few thousand of them, but they have their people in key positions in every government, everywhere in the world. As you heard me point out, simply there are about 80 members in the United States of the North American chapter of the Trilateral Commission, and yet they hold so many of the key positions in the Obama administration and the George W. Bush administration and the Clinton administration and the first Bush administration and even in the Reagan administration. And Ronald Reagan, after criticizing Jimmy Carter for having members of the Trilateral Commission in key positions in his government, Ronald Reagan invited all the members of the North American chapter of the Trilateral Commission to the White House for dinner. You'll never read that in the conservative press. It's included in David Rockefeller's book, Memoirs, which we do have, going into the background, of course, how his daughters go down to visit Fidel and Castro, and Fidel comes up to visit David and talk to the Council on Foreign Relations. Nothing as it appears to be. You need to get my book, Brotherhood of Darkness. You need to get our talks on the Dark Secret, certainly on the Forbidden Secret, the syllabuses that go with it. There's so much material we have. It's available by calling 1-800-544-8927. If you're in a position to help us, we'd love to hear from you. We might mention we do sell the Miracle Two-Stroke products, and we love them. We use them ourselves. And if you don't have the gel or the lotion, you really need to. And certainly my wife uses that lotion and gel on her face, and she really has no wrinkles. She's 70 years old. People look at her and they think she's about 50, that I robbed the cradle, but that's, in fact, after taking certainly the resveratrol products that our good friend Bill Sardi puts out, her hair turned from gray to brown, and amazing things. And certainly we have all sorts of health products. Certainly Alzheimer's disease is on the rise. Recent studies have showed that B12 makes all the difference in the world, and they can actually show that if you take the B12, why your brain doesn't shrink. If you don't take the B12, your brain does shrink. We have sublingual B12. Most people are deficient in magnesium. They're deficient in selenium. They're deficient in iodine. You need to be taking selenium. You need to get the list of the health products we carry. We take most of them ourselves. I'm 83 and doing pretty well, and anyway, if you'd like to get a list of the products we have, you can go to our website or ask for the list of health products. Curcumin you should be taking on a regular basis. It's one of the herbs that certainly has tremendous anti-inflammatory reaction, and certainly give us a call at 1-800-544-8927. We do hope you'll perhaps consider using some of these products. If you can get them from us, we have a prostate support for men. Most men have prostate problems, and certainly you need the prostate support. Women need the menopause support. We have an immune support. With the flu time coming up, you should be on large doses of vitamin D3, which, of course, is not only helps to prevent infections, it also, of course, it boosts your immune system. It helps you fight off cancer. Remember, 1 in 2 men, 1 in 3 women is going to develop cancer. A direct result of our war on cancer. We have a war on terrorism, we get more terrorism. A war on drugs, we get more drugs. A war certainly on poverty, we get more poverty.